for September is embracing change. With the affirmation, my life is enlivened and enriched by a new perspective. Can you affirm that with me? My life is enlivened and enriched by a new perspective. So how many of you resonate with that affirmation? In essence, you welcome change of all stripes into your life at all times. Okay? And how many of you feel just a little bit of resistance come up? It doesn't mean you're not working on it, but your initial response to change is wait. Yeah, that gets it. Wait. Well, I think it's fair to say that most of us have a kind of love-hate relationship with change. When we're in the middle of some major challenges, be it health or relationship, financial, home or work, or some kinds of struggles, be it in the midst of a major project or a goal like getting a degree, or Michelle's up here getting her ordination, or even getting through a pregnancy, we often wish it would just be over. Anybody have that sense yet? Conversely, when times are good, when everything seems to have finally fallen into place, we wish it could stay that way forever. Sometimes allowing ourselves to slide from wishing to expecting it to stay that way forever. I'm sure we can all recall times that we felt each of these kinds of reactions. Additionally, as inevitable as change is, it doesn't feel natural or easy, especially to our Western minds. We kind of like to be in control, and we convinced ourselves somehow that we are. There's something about change that repels us, triggering our fears of the unknown and thwarting that illusion of control. And yet, it's inescapable, like, as they say, death and paying taxes. So how do we learn to embrace change, such that we can minimize our fear and discomfort, and at the same time, mine all the blessings and benefits that are inherent in this unavoidable and essential aspect of life? In short, framing it in last week's lesson, how do we live our life abundantly through all the changes of our lives? So we're going to be addressing this question over the next couple of weeks by looking at change from a number of vantage points, including exploring how we can more graciously and courageously accept, even embrace change in general, and in particular, those unexpected events or circumstances that seem to be out of our control. Number two, we're going to be looking at increasing our capacity to purposefully create change in our lives, whether it's changing ourselves or our circumstances. And finally, we're going to be exploring how we can participate in affecting global change, including being the change we want to see in the world. So this morning, we're beginning with accepting and embracing change, especially those changes that seem to happen to us. Even as we all know, everything happens through us. And that begins with acknowledging that change is the only constant in life. Seems like a no-brainer, right? At the very least, the construct of time itself provides us with a continual perception within our everyday waking consciousness of always moving forward. The sun sets and rises, the earth's seasons, as to those of our lives, mark both circular and linear progression, and ultimately we, our children and our grandchildren, and even our beloved pets, age and eventually die. There's no denying it, and yet deny it, we often do. As I noted earlier, some part of our human nature or social conditioning seems to make us naturally biased against, or at least cautious of, change, whether it's perceived to be positive or negative, and even when the change is self-initiated. Think about getting married, having a baby, changing jobs or careers, all seemingly joyous occasions that all still trigger fear in us. In his book, Who Am I? The 16 Basic Desires That Motivate Our Actions and Define Our Personalities, the late PhD psychologist Stephen Rice argues that one of the desires that drive humans is the desire for order. And by that, he says, it's a need for permanence, stability, and predictability. Anybody relate? Kind of like knowing what's going to happen next, right? Well, well-known British author Neil Gaiman, he wrote Coraline and the Graveyard Book, persuasively illustrates this by saying, I like the stars. It's the illusion of permanence, I think. I mean, they're always flaring up and caving in and going out, but from here, I can pretend. I can pretend that things last. I can pretend that lives last longer than moments. Can you relate to that feeling? I know I sure can. You know, we want to have this sense. Part of the call to religion and spirituality is wanting to make sense out of things and have a sense of continuity. Another social psychologist, Roy Baumeister, in his book Meaning of Life, suggests that that very human need to find and apply meaning to life can often create a false permanence that serves the purpose of making us feel more secure, but which can also lead to suffering. There's a familiar phrase that's often used to comfort or reassure those going through tough times. Can you imagine what it is? This too shall pass. The origins of the saying have been traced to 13th century Jewish folklore and to Sufi poets. One version of the story tells of King Solomon, known for his wisdom, asking his trusted priest, Benaiah ben Jehoiada, to find him a certain ring that is known to have magic powers. Specifically, the king explains, if a happy man looks at it, he becomes sad. And if a sad man looks at it, he becomes happy. Solomon actually knew that no such ring existed, but he wished to give his priest a taste of humility. He told Benaiah that he wished to wear the ring for the Sukkot festival, which would give Benaiah 6 months to find it. Well, as you might imagine, Benaiah had no idea where to locate the ring, and so the months passed, and Sukkot was soon upon them. On the morning before the festival, which would begin at sundown, the priest decided to take a walk in one of the poorest quarters of Jerusalem. He came across a merchant who was setting out his wares, which included a few rings and trinkets on a shabby carpet. Benaiah was moved to stop and ask the man, have you by any chance heard of a magic ring that makes the happy wearer forget his joy and the broken-hearted wearer forget his sorrows? He watched as the grandfather took a plain gold ring from his carpet and engraved something on it. When Benaiah read the words on the ring, his face broke out in a great smile, and he purchased the ring from the merchant and went back to the festival. That night, as the festivities began, Solomon, smiling, knowing that he had tricked his priest, asked Benaiah, well, my friend, have you found what I sent you after? But to his surprise, Benaiah held up a small gold ring, declaring, here it is, your majesty. And soon, as Solomon read the inscription, the smile vanished from his face. The inscription on the band consisted of 3 Hebrew letters, Gimel, Zayin, and Yud, which represent the words, Gamza Yavar, this too shall pass. In that moment, it was Solomon who was humbled, realizing that all his wisdom, wealth, and power were but fleeting things, and just like him, would ultimately vanish into the whirlwind of time, and his joy turned to sadness. Although the Western world continues to struggle with these lessons, thus we have this series, the wisdom underlying this story is grounded in the ancient principles of impermanence, which lie at the core of Eastern traditions, including Hinduism, which is some 6,000 years old, Buddhism, and Taoism. And as we heard in this morning's scripture, the Buddha saying, all conditioned things are impermanent. When one sees this with wisdom, one turns away from suffering. Thus, to avoid suffering, the Buddha teaches one must abolish the darkness of delusion and humbly accept life as it is and is not. Meaning simply, everything is constantly changing. Nothing is permanent, and that's not inherently good or bad. Which leads to the second part of the equation. To paraphrase Shakespeare, though Buddha also said this, there's nothing either good or bad, but thinking, our thinking, makes it so. With this awakening, in essence, that change happens and that we get to decide what it means, we begin to develop spiritual maturity. You might recall the definition I shared just a few weeks ago. Spiritual maturity is the ability to act with wisdom and compassion while maintaining inner and outer peace or equanimity regardless of circumstances. In essence, regardless of whatever changes are happening around us. Additionally, we noted that the key to attaining this wisdom, compassion, and maturity is our intention to grow holistically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. Our commitment to the spiritual work of love and transformation in our lives and in the world, and our dedication to more fully expressing the Christ light that is the truth of our being. All that means is to be open and mindful to all the lessons of life that, in addition to our study and our prayer and our meditation, comes through our experiences, our challenges, our losses, our gains, the people in our lives, our opportunities. In essence, they all come through change. When growth is our purpose, and we recognize change, especially adversity, as our greatest teacher, it makes accepting, even embracing change, part of living life abundantly. You remember I shared last week about the challenges that I had gone through and how they had ultimately blessed my life. Dag Hammarskjöld, former head of the United Nations, once said, "To everything that has been, I say thank you. To everything before me, I say yes." When we say yes, we're accepting the facts of the situation, but not its power over us. When we resist, we give our power away. We allow our fears and particular point of view to define the situation and thereby define and limit our perspective. Acceptance of what is, leaving our judgments and resistance behind, opens us up to a field of possibilities and the multitude of choices before us. Then, with mindful self-reflection, observation, discernment, imagination, and courage, we're able to take authentic action that aligns with and supports our intention to act with wisdom and compassion while remaining grounded and centered in the process. Now, it's important to note that embracing change and accepting what is likely will not prevent us from feeling the emotional pain of life. Pain that comes from the experiences of rejection or loneliness, loss, trauma, and failure. Nor will it help us escape physical pain associated with injury or illness or aging. But it will help us avoid the self-inflicted suffering that comes from attaching stories to our pain and then allowing them to define and limit our lives. Pain, like change, is inevitable and passing. Suffering is optional, and it can last a lifetime. Finally, what I shared last week about going through my own challenges is now being studied and documented in studies called adversity growth, or PSTD growth, or trauma growth. And they're having amazing findings. Growth through adversity brings with it rich and amazing blessings, including improved and deepened relationships with others, identification of new possibilities for one's life, increased personal strength and resilience, spiritual transformation, and an enhanced appreciation for all of life, helping us live in each moment fully so that we mine all the goodness and blessings there are. And these positive changes, in turn, relate to the development of important qualities of character and spiritual maturity, such as diligence, generosity, love, purpose, and humility. Of course, if you don't go into life believing that growth is your purpose and that there are blessings in every circumstance, sometimes we miss these opportunities to grow through our adversity. But when we're awake, when we know that whatever is happening out there can serve our highest growth, can serve our continued development and lifting of our consciousness, then we can be blessed in each and every moment. So in closing, I'll leave you with the wisdom of Alan Watts. The only way to make sense out of change is to plunge into it, move with it, and join the dance. Namaste.
Surrender to the love of God. Flat on the floor, if that's comfortable, resting your hands gently on your lap, palms up, always ready to receive a blessing from Spirit. So we begin to let go of all the outer distractions, all the things we brought with us in our minds today, and begin to bring our attention to this present moment. As Vicky said, change is inevitable, and we know that our lives are always changing. And so one tool that we can use to help us through the changes of life is a mindfulness practice. And mindfulness is really so much simpler than most people think. All we need to do is be here now. Taking some deep breaths often helps us to relax and come into the present moment. So breathing in, really deep, filling up the chest and lungs. Holding for just a moment and then releasing slowly. And again, breathing in deeply and releasing slowly. You can continue to take a few slow, deep breaths. And as you do so, you can just notice that you're breathing. Notice your body sitting here. Notice how it feels. Are there places that you're holding tension that you can relax just a little? You might relax your jaw, relax your hands, allow your shoulders to relax back and down. And just get acquainted with this present moment. You can listen to the sounds around you. Just noticing them, but not getting attached to them. Just noticing that the sounds are coming and going, cars going by outside. We don't have to do anything about them. You can just notice them. Again, become aware of your body sitting here breathing. Be aware of each breath that you take. And simple practice of paying attention to the breath. important thing is to not resist the thoughts or beat ourselves up for thinking. Just notice them.